So all the efforts to get what I need in this life are only going to bring suffering. Last time I did the BBC, I spoke these lines. It's from Geshe Topke's teaching. Every time I read this, it makes me squirm still. I want to bargain with it. Maybe if some of the efforts to get what I needed wouldn't be suffering, I might be able to accept it. But all efforts? So when I read this the first time, it led me to read about the 16 attributes of the Four Truths of Aryas. In Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature, His Holiness said that the 16 attributes of the Four Truths are taught to protect us from dukkha by helping us to develop wisdom and insight. So when I read something that makes me squirm, I try to pay attention to that because it helps to reveal my wrong view, my distortions. And even though I don't want to do it, I kind of make myself go there, which has, I think, been beneficial, actually. So this sentence that all the efforts to get what I need in this life are only going to bring suffering are due to the four distortions or conceptions that I hold. Now, each noble truth has four attributes. And last time I talked about perceiving permanence in the impermanent. And today I'll talk about perceiving pleasure in what is dukkha. And the first four chapters of Aryadeva's 400 has a description of the four distorted conceptions and their antidotes. So that's a good resource to use. So because things are impermanent, pleasure is also impermanent and in the nature of dukkha. Aryadeva in the 400 asks us to abandon belief in pleasure. That seems quite radical, doesn't it? And I think, there's many reasons for that, how we're conditioned in this existence to, get pleasure, get the happiness. But it's also challenging because some of the activities that we think are pleasurable are associated with maintaining life. So like food, we can't not eat to renounce the pleasure of that, So, we have to keep trying to find a balance and try to see it as it really is. It's very difficult. The arising of a feeling of satisfaction when suffering is somewhat weaker is called pleasure. Let me read that again. The arising of a feeling of satisfaction when suffering is somewhat weaker is called pleasure. Boy, that puts it in perspective, doesn't it? Gosh. And of course, when we couple that with seeing things as permanent, we can see how we set ourselves up for this unsatisfactoriness, this dukkha. And of course, none of us wants this suffering, but we experience involuntarily. And this is mostly because we don't identify dukkha and its causes properly. If we begin to identify how we operate through the lens of perceiving pleasure in what is dukkha, we can find a realistic balance and get off this pleasure-pain merry-go-round. This wastes so much time. It's like following something that's continually going to disappoint us, And, all of suffering can be subsumed under the suffering of evident pain, the unsatisfactory situation of not being able to hold on to the pleasant, and the pervasive suffering of conditioning. And the basis upon which these arise is body and mind, the five aggregates subject to clinging. And because we have these 5 aggregates, all the other unsatisfactory situations arise. So for me, the first and foremost practice is to remember all of the so-called pleasure here in this existence is fleeting. And I do that because I've been so conditioned, by advertising and movies and, fairy tales, that, you can find the happiness somehow. So to keep reminding myself that whatever I do find it's fleeting uh, is kind of the first pass, the first thing to kind of uh, put into my mind. And then, we've been so conditioned to think that we can find true happiness in this samsaric world if we just arrange things in a certain way. Now, if I spend the bulk of my time doing this, there is little time for practicing the Dharma. So, beginning each day with the intention of some resiliency, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties is helpful. And this starts my day when I can remember it, to being in line with the reality of the ever changing nature of our existence. Secondly, if I remind myself that no matter what I do to make myself comfortable physically, it's fleeting. So when the body is not cooperating, which happens more and more as I age, I put my attention on my mind more than on the changes that happen in my body. And so then here, acceptance is a very helpful tool. I try to find balance with my body when it doesn't cooperate. I accept that and adjust to what is happening now. Of course, this is very challenging because it bumps up against all my identities and what I, have been able to do in my life. And as I get older now, I can't do those same things. So it bumps up against that. And then I have a reaction to that. So this idea about every day it's going to have a different, I'll have a different experience with my body, and I just accept it. I just accept it. And that takes some focus and effort at time. It's not so easy. But that's much better than getting angry at it or pushing through and then, hurting my body. That doesn't help. And so just accept that every day it's going to feel different, and I don't need to put a whole lot of uh, attention on that. Instead, I put attention on my mind, on how I'm thinking. That's more important. So if I can keep track of these things, of everything is changing, and there is no pleasure in this suffering existence, and if I keep reminding myself that the arising of a feeling of satisfaction when suffering is somewhat weaker is called pleasure, then that keeps me a little more in line with what this reality is here. Then that can fuel and strengthen my renunciation. It's a place then to park my mind and practice. The Buddha described the 4 distortions and distortions of the mind. He said, perceiving permanence in the impermanent, perceiving pleasure in what is dukkha, perceiving a self in what is not self, and perceiving beauty in what is foul, beings resort to wrong views. Their minds deranged, their perceptions twisted. Such people are bound by the yoke of Mara and do not reach security from bondage. Beings continue in samsara, going repeatedly from birth to death. But when the Buddhas arise in the world, and send forth a brilliant light. They reveal this teaching that leads to the stilling of dukkha. Hearing it, wise people regain their sanity. They see the impermanent as impermanent, and what is dukkha as dukkha. They see what is not self as not self, and the unattractive as unattractive. By acquiring the right view, they overcome all dukkha. It's very beautiful. So it really helps us remind ourselves of the possibilities of what we can accomplish here in this samsaric world. And by continuing to practice on the path with a little more clarity in what we're actually dealing with here, then we will step by step develop our qualities and our insight, our wisdom, our compassion. And then one day we will become fully awakened. And it's on that day that we will be able to help beings in such a profound way.